The year is 1280. You are a monk in Pisa. You have spent your entire life in one room, copying manuscripts by hand, one page at a time, by candlelight. Every letter, every word, Latin, Greek, Arabic, it doesn't matter. Your job is to keep human knowledge alive on the page. By your 40s, something changes. The letters blur, not all at once, first at night, then in the afternoon, then even in the morning light. Your hands still work, your mind is sharper than ever, but your eyes are done. And in a world where knowledge only exists if someone can read it, when your eyes go, you're finished. That was the life of nearly every scholar, every monk, every merchant, every notary in 13th century Europe, until someone changed it. I'm Aiden Thomas of Hidden History, and this is how humanity fixed the blur. This is the history of spectacles. Before we get to 13th century Italy, we need to go further back, much further. The story of spectacles doesn't begin with glass, it begins with light, and with people noticing something strange about it, for over 1,000 years without ever doing anything useful with it. The Roman philosopher Seneca once wrote that even small dim letters could be enlarged by looking through a glass globe filled with water. There's a story, one line from Pliny the Elder, that Emperor Nero, who was famously nearsighted, watched gladiator fights through a polished emerald. We don't know why. Pliny didn't say. It could be that it helped him see better and reduce glare, or he was watching reflections of things behind him. Either way, the ancients had the observation. What they never had was the idea of shaping glass to fix a specific pair of eyes. The real breakthrough came from Cairo. In 1021, a scholar named Ibn al-Haytham finished a 7-volume work that would quietly rewrite everything Western science thought it knew about vision. It is called Kitab al-Manazir, the Book of Optics. For centuries, the prevailing theory in Europe had been that vision worked outward, that your eyes sent rays out into the world, and that's how you saw things. Touch, essentially, but with light. Al-Haytham proved this was wrong. Vision was the result of light entering the eye from the outside. Simple now, revolutionary then. But here's the part that matters for our story. Al-Haytham also described how a curved glass sphere could bend light, could enlarge an image. He was writing pure theory, but that theory reached medieval Italy through Latin translations, and by the 13th century, European scholars like Roger Bacon were already experimenting with what it implied. Because if a curved piece of glass could bend light, could you put it in front of an aging eye and bend it back into focus? By the 1200s, monks in European monasteries were already using what were sometimes called reading stones, polished spheres of crystal placed directly on the page to magnify the text beneath. Clumsy, stationary, but they worked. The question was, could you wear them? The earliest written evidence of actual wearable spectacles comes from a sermon. On February 23, 1306, a Dominican friar named Giordano da Pisa stood before his congregation in Florence and mentioned, almost casually, a remarkable new invention. It is not yet 20 years, he said, since there was found the art of making eyeglasses, which make for good vision. Not yet 20 years. That places the invention at roughly 1285 to 1286, northern Italy, almost certainly Pisa. The earliest spectacles looked nothing like what you wear today. 2 convex glass lenses riveted together at the handles, like a very awkward pair of pliers that you clamped onto your nose. No arms, no temples, no comfort. You held them in place with one hand, or balanced them with extraordinary stillness while you sat at a desk. And they could only correct one problem: presbyopia, the age-related stiffening that blurs close-up vision. The first version of reading glasses. They were designed for exactly one kind of person, an educated adult over 40 who needed to read. In medieval Europe, that was essentially the entire intellectual class. By 1352, a painter named Tommaso da Modena was depicting cardinals in spectacles in his frescoes, proof that within 2 generations of the invention, eyeglasses were already considered the natural accessory of a serious reader. But here's where it gets interesting. The same friar who told us glasses had been invented, Giordano da Pisa, also told us something darker. He knew who invented them. He said as much in his sermon. He had personally met the man and spoken with him, and then he never wrote the name down. The traditional account, repeated by historians for generations, is that the original inventor kept his technique a trade secret, a source of income his and his alone. Whoever he was, he invented one of the most consequential tools in human history and chose to protect it rather than share it. Enter Alessandro della Spina. Spina was a Dominican friar in Pisa at the monastery of Santa Caterina. The monastery's own chronicle describes him as a modest, intelligent, capable of remaking anything he saw. According to that same tradition, when Spina encountered spectacles, shown a working pair by someone who couldn't explain how they were made, he studied them, worked out the technique himself, and did the exact opposite of the original inventor. He gave it away, freely, to anyone who asked. By the early 14th century, the technique was spreading. Venetian craftsmen, the same masters who guarded the secrets of glass blowing on the island of Murano, began producing lenses from actual glass rather than rock crystal. Clearer, cheaper, scalable. Within a generation, spectacles had reached Germany, France, England. But here's the dark turn. In 1684, nearly 400 years after the invention, a Florentine historian named Ferdinando del Migliore wanted to claim the glory for his city. So he fabricated a tomb inscription. He invented a person, Salvino di Armati, supposedly buried in Florence, supposedly the inventor of glasses in 1285. The forgery was convincing. It was copied and repeated by scholars for centuries. It wasn't exposed until 1920, when a philologist named Isidora del Lungo finally dug into the original documents and proved it was a fabrication. The Latin grammar was wrong for the period. The word he used for inventor didn't even exist yet in Florentine speech. And genealogical records showed no such person in the Armati family at that time. Salvino da Armati never existed. For 236 years, a made-up man got credit for one of the most important inventions in history. Now, here's what most people miss. Spectacles didn't just help people see, they extended the productive lifespan of every thinking person in Europe. Before glasses, the average scholar had roughly 20 useful years of close-up reading before presbyopia ended it. A monk began copying manuscripts around age 20. By 45, his close-up vision was gone. No correction, no workaround. You were finished. After glasses, that same monk could keep working into his 60s, even his 70s. The scholars who drove the intellectual revival of the 14th and 15th centuries, the ones who rediscovered classical texts, argued theology, mapped the stars, designed the cathedrals, were doing some of their sharpest work in their 50s and 60s, decades they'd otherwise have spent unable to read a page. Historians point to eyeglasses as one of the quiet, undercredited reasons Europe's intellectual output kept climbing instead of hitting a wall of aging scribes. And then came the printing press. When Johannes Gutenberg finished his movable type machine around 1440, he didn't just accelerate literacy, he created a sudden, urgent, continent-wide demand. Books were suddenly everywhere, affordable, accessible, and suddenly everyone needed to read them. Spectacles went from a luxury item for aging monks to an essential tool for a growing literate class. Demand exploded. By the late 1400s, spectacle makers had their own professional guilds across Europe. The invention that began with one anonymous Pisan craftsman was now an industry. But here's the limitation nobody mentions. For nearly 200 years, spectacles only fixed one kind of blindness, if you were nearsighted. If it was the distance that blurred, not the page, glasses did nothing for you. Half the vision problem in Europe remained unsolved. The fix required the opposite kind of lens, concave, curving inward instead of outward. Craftsmen worked out how to grind glass that way sometime in the 1400s. One of the clearest pieces of evidence comes from a painting in 1570. Raphael painted Pope Leo X holding a pair of concave spectacles. Leo was famously nearsighted and used them for hunting to pick out game across an open field. It's a small detail in a Renaissance masterpiece. It is also proof that opticians had finally cracked a problem that had stumped them for 2 centuries. Over time, the design changed slowly. For the first 3 centuries, spectacles sat on the nose and nothing else. Sometime in the 1600s, Spanish opticians began experimenting with loops of string run over the ears so a wearer could actually walk around with their glasses on instead of holding them in place. In 1727, a London optician named Edward Scarlett went further, replacing the strings with rigid metal arms, what we now call temples, designed to press against the sides of the head. Modern glasses, essentially. Early versions were long and straight rather than curved behind the ear, in part because fashionable gentlemen of the era wore large powdered wigs, and a hooked temple had nowhere to go. And in 1784, Benjamin Franklin, who had already charmed France, negotiated the Treaty of Paris, and flown a kite in a thunderstorm, wrote a letter to his friend George Whately announcing he was happy in the invention of double spectacles. He had cut his 2 pairs of lenses in half, fused them together, a distance lens on top, a reading lens on the bottom, bifocals, 1 pair for every occasion. Franklin was in his late 70s when he invented them. Like a lot of us as we age, he needed them. Reading wasn't the only problem eyewear eventually solved. There was also the sun. In the 1750s, a London optician named James Ayscough started experimenting with blue and green tinted lenses. But he wasn't trying to block glare. He genuinely believed the tint itself corrected certain vision problems. The idea of glasses as sun protection, rather than medicine, took another 150 years to catch on. It finally went mainstream in 1929 when Sam Foster started selling cheap, mass-produced tinted glasses on the boardwalk in Atlantic City. Foster Grants. And for the first time, ordinary beachgoers were buying eyewear on purpose, in the sun, for fun. A few years later, the U.S. military asked a company called Raymond to design anti-glare lenses for pilots, the origin of the classic aviator shade. Then Hollywood got involved, and dark glasses stopped being about your eyes at all. They became about your image. But the flashiest use of tinted lenses wasn't in Hollywood, it was on a football field. Meet Raymond, Baltimore Colts of the 1950s and 60s, one of the greatest receivers who ever lived, and a man who had absolutely no business being on the field. One leg was shorter than the other. His back was so bad he wore a custom corset to play. And his eyes? Raymond Barry was severely nearsighted, acute myopia, close to legally blind. On paper, he was a liability. So he did something almost no professional athlete did in the 1950s. He wore contact lenses to play football. But here's the catch. No pun intended. The early contacts didn't stay put. Every time Barry snapped his head to track a ball in the air or a gust of wind caught him, the lenses would slip. Imagine trying to catch a pass thrown 60 miles an hour while your vision randomly slips out of focus. And then there was the sun. Daytime games at the Los Angeles Coliseum turned the sky into a wall of glare. So Barry, obsessive and inventive, built his own fix, a custom pair of wraparound tinted goggles worn right over his helmet. His opponents laughed. They called him Captain Midnight. He didn't care. He caught the ball. This is a man who invented his own training drills to compensate for what his body couldn't do, running the route 10,000 times until it was pure muscle memory. He turned his weakness into a system, and it worked. Raymond Barry retired as one of the most reliable hands in the history of the game. And here's the part I love. Decades later, on Peyton Manning's show, they dug out Barry's original goggles, strapped them on a modern NFL star. The verdict? They actually worked. A homemade fix from the 1950s still cut the glare 60 years later. The same principle that led a medieval monk to keep reading at 60 let a half-blind receiver dominate a sport built on split-second sight. It wasn't the perfect body that made Raymond Barry great. It was the lens and the refusal to let a broken one stop him. For 600 years, spectacles carried a quiet stigma, a sign your body was failing. Plenty of people who badly needed them refused to wear them in public well into the 20th century, purely out of vanity. But because glasses were tied to reading, and reading was tied to learning, the meaning flipped completely. The scholar, the professor, the clever one in the room. By the 18th and 19th centuries, wealthy Europeans were practically competing to be seen in eyewear. The monocle, worn by gentlemen as a badge of status. The lorgnette, held up on a handle by elegant women who didn't want to commit to a frame. The pince, flipped straight onto the nose, worn by everyone from bankers to American presidents like FDR. The very same object that once signaled decline had become a signal of sophistication. Today, people with perfect vision buy sunglasses with no prescription in the lens at all, purely for how they look. Today, roughly 4 billion people on Earth wear corrective lenses, more than half the human population. Most of them put their glasses on in the morning without a second thought, including yours truly. But here's what that small act contains. 700 years of accumulated ingenuity, starting in a workshop in 13th century Pisa. A friar who kept a secret, another one who refused to. Venetian craftsmen who turned crystal into clarity. A pope who needed to see across a hunting field. Benjamin Franklin in his late 70s, cutting lenses in half so he'd never have to switch pairs again. And one anonymous inventor, whose name we will probably never know, who changed what human minds could do with time. It wasn't the man on the tomb, it was the friar who gave the secret away. If you enjoyed today's episode of Hidden History, hit that subscribe button, like the video, give us a hype, subscribe to our email, and comment below on another invention you'd like us to cover. Next week, we're concluding our trilogy on glass. We're uncovering the hidden history of another invention that changed what humans could see and when they could see it. Next week, we're covering the hidden history of the light bulb. Now, take a look around. History is everywhere.